Hi there, I'm Tony Lee, and this is Hot Flasher, your daily menopause podcast that serves up fresh news, research, and wellness tips. I've built a daily news pipeline to find the latest on women's health and menopause research. Allow me to introduce my co-host Nikki, who handles the headlines. Take it away, Nikki.
Thanks, Tony. We've got a good one today. 3 papers, all out of the NAMS journal, and they cover more ground than you might expect. I want to start with the cognition study because it's the one I keep turning over. It's from the SWAN HDL Ancillary Study, SWAN being the study of women's health across the nation, which has been running long enough and tracking closely enough that papers coming out of it tend to be worth paying attention to. This particular ancillary looked at inflammatory and immune biomarkers in midlife women and asked whether those markers predicted cognitive performance later on. Specifically, working memory. Working memory is the kind of cognition that lets you hold several pieces of information in your head at once while you're doing something with them. Following a conversation, remembering why you walked into a room, keeping track of a recipe while you're also managing the stove. It's the thing that feels like it's slipping when women describe menopause brain fog, not necessarily word recall, not big picture reasoning, but that sense of juggling capacity going down. What the study found is that higher baseline GlycA, that's a marker of systemic low-grade inflammation, specifically glycoprotein signals, was associated with lower future working memory, not in women who had an inflammatory disease. This is baseline circulating inflammation during the menopause transition. The higher it was at the start of the study, the worse the working memory outcome later. That's the part worth sitting with, because what it suggests is that inflammation levels during perimenopause, which is already a period of significant hormonal and metabolic flux, may be setting a trajectory for cognitive health downstream. Not sealing a fate, but pointing in a direction. There's a complicating wrinkle, which I actually appreciate. Complement factors C3 and C4, proteins that are part of the immune system, told a different story. Higher baseline complement factor 4 and increases in both C3 and C4 over time appear to be cognitively protective. So this is not a clean inflammation bad, reduce all of it narrative. The immune system's relationship with cognition is more specific than that. Certain inflammatory signals seem to be working against the brain. Certain immune activity seems to be supporting it. That's genuinely more interesting than a simple headline. The study's conclusion was that targeting inflammation during the menopause transition may be a real pathway toward preserving cognitive health. I think that's a reasonable read of the data, but the data is observational. It tells us about association, not whether intervening on GlycA would change outcomes. That study still needs to be done. What this does is establish a biological plausibility and a direction, and for a field that has historically understudied women's brains during this transition, that matters. It's the kind of foundational evidence that when your doctor pulls up research on a platform like Open Evidence would be in the mix, informing a more complete picture of menopause and cognitive risk. The practical implication, and I want to be careful here because this is still research, not a protocol, is that the things we already know can reduce systemic low-grade inflammation are not exotic. Sleep quality, dietary patterns, movement, the basics, which are also the things that are most disrupted during perimenopause. That circularity is frustrating. It's also worth naming. Staying in the biology and behaviour lane, there's a randomized controlled trial, also out of the NAMS journal this week, on a probiotic formula for menopausal symptoms. I flagged this one because it's registered on clinicaltrials.gov NCT 06604234, which means It was a real RCT, pre-registered, not a company writing up their own testimonials. The findings: the probiotic formula was associated with improvements in menopausal symptoms and quality of life. The Global Cervantes score, that's a validated tool for measuring menopause-related quality of life, was similar between groups, but the symptom improvements were real. Here's my honest read. The gut hormone connection is genuinely interesting biology. There's a growing body of work on the estrobolome, the collection of gut bacteria involved in estrogen metabolism. And it's plausible that gut microbiome composition affects how estrogen is processed and recirculated in the body. That's the mechanism being gestured at here, even if the paper doesn't fully nail it down. The researchers themselves say future investigations are needed to confirm the clinical effect and the underlying mechanism. That's the right thing to say. It's also a signal that we're early. What this study is not is a green light to go spend $60 on a menopause probiotic at your local wellness shop. The formula used in the trial was specific. The population was specific. The results are promising, not definitive. And the supplement market will absolutely take a headline like probiotic improves menopause symptoms and run it several miles past what the evidence supports. I'm not dismissing the finding. A well-designed RCT showing symptom improvement is meaningful. I just want to hold the line between interesting, warrants more investigation, and here is your solution. Those are different things. And the distance between them is where a lot of women get burned financially and emotionally. The third paper is a narrative review, and it's the one that made me the most tired in a familiar way. It looked at how menopause is taught or not taught in undergraduate medical education, not residency, not fellowships, the foundational training where medical students learn the building blocks of clinical practice. The short version of what they found: menopause education in medical school is inconsistent at best. There are gaps in content. There are gaps in teaching models. Learner preparedness is unclear at graduation. And this is for a condition that, as the authors note, accounts for approximately 1/3 of a woman's lifetime and requires a management across multiple specialties. 1/3 of a woman's lifetime. And the doctors treating her may have spent more class time on conditions far rarer than menopause because the curriculum was designed in an era when women's midlife health simply wasn't considered a priority. That's not speculation, that's the history. The consequence is the doctor who tells a 46-year-old that her symptoms are anxiety. The GP who isn't confident discussing HRT options. The specialist who never connects the joint pain or the palpitations or the cognitive changes to the hormonal context. These aren't failures of individual doctors being careless. They are the downstream result of a system that never properly taught them. What this review does, usefully, is put it in writing at the undergraduate level, because most of the conversation about training gaps has focused on residency and postgraduate education. Starting earlier is the right instinct. A doctor who graduates without a foundational understanding of menopause doesn't suddenly acquire it in residency unless they're in a program that prioritizes it, and most don't. What I'd want to see follow from a review like this is curriculum reform with teeth. Not a single lecture, not an optional module, but integrated longitudinal education, the way endocrinology and cardiology are integrated. Menopause touches sleep medicine, psychiatry, orthopedics, neurology, cardiovascular medicine. It's not a niche. Treating it like one in the curriculum is a choice, and it's a choice that has consequences for every woman who sits across from a doctor who has never given the tools.
Thanks for listening to Hot Flasher. We're back tomorrow with more, so don't forget to subscribe. See you tomorrow.